She was 23 and homeless. Not for a season, not by bad luck she could name, homeless the long way. The way that starts in childhood and never quite lets go, so that a room of her own had come to feel like a thing that happened to other people. And with $1 silver, the last coin she owned, she bought a caved-in Prairie way station standing alone on an abandoned emigrant road in the Nebraska panhandle, a building the county had long since stopped trying to sell. Half the sod and timber roof had fallen in. The great double chimney at its heart stood cracked and blackened. The stage line agent in the nearest town told her the road was 30 years dead, that nothing ran that trail anymore but the wind, and that a woman alone out there would be found frozen come spring. But what nobody knew, not the agent, not the town, not the girl herself, was that bricked into the base of that old double chimney, sealed away since 1863, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Temperance Aldous had never had a home, and she had stopped, somewhere along the way, expecting one. She was born in 1868 in a wagon on the westward road, the child of emigrant parents who were always going somewhere better and never quite arriving. Her father had the fever that so many had in those years, the belief that the next valley, the next territory, the next 160 acres of free land would be the one that finally answered. And he chased it. Until it killed him. Worn out and disappointed, when Temperance was 9. Her mother chased it a while longer, out of habit or grief, and then died of a lung complaint in a rented room in a town whose name Temperance could no longer remember when the girl was 12. After that she was passed along the way unwanted children are passed along the frontier, to a farm family who needed hands more than they wanted a daughter, to a widowed shopkeeper, to a boarding house that took her on to cook and clean. She grew up sleeping in other people's houses, in back rooms and lofts and lean-tos, always a guest, always temporary, always one hard season from the road again. She learned young the particular arithmetic of the unwanted child, how to be useful enough to keep but never so much trouble as to be sent on, how to take up the smallest possible space in a house that was not hers, how to be grateful out loud for a kindness that was really only a use. She was good at it, the way a person becomes good at the thing that keeps them alive. In the farm family she rose before the family and slept after them, and learned to read the weather of other people's moods the way she read the sky. In the shopkeeper's back room she learned to make herself so quietly indispensable that he forgot, for whole seasons, that she cost anything to keep. And all the while she watched other children, the wanted ones, the ones with a place set for them at the table by right and not by sufferance, and she studied the mystery of belonging the way a hungry person studies a lit window, from outside, in the cold, understanding that the warmth was real but was not for her. By the time she was grown she had lived in 11 houses and belonged to none of them, and she had stopped, the way you stop pressing a bruise, expecting that the 12th would be any different. But her mother had left her one thing, and it turned out to be the thing that mattered. In the years before she died, in the rented rooms and the wagon nights, her mother had taught Temperance to keep a home. Really keep it. The deep, old skills that a woman carried when a house was a thing you made with your hands out of whatever the country gave you. How to chink a wall against a blizzard. How to keep a fire that would hold coals through a night so a family woke to warmth. How to make a hard place livable, and then make it kind. Her mother had done it in 100 temporary places, made each grim rented room briefly beautiful before they moved on, and she had passed the whole art of it to her daughter like a dowry. Temperance grew up homeless with the hands of a homemaker, and there is no lonelier thing. To know exactly how to make a home and to have nowhere to make one. She was 23, cooking in a railroad hotel in a Nebraska town when the thing happened that put her on the road again, not cruelty this time, just the plain indifference of the world. The hotel changed hands, and the new owner brought his own people, and Temperance was let go with a week's wages and a reference and the familiar cold understanding that she had no claim on any roof anywhere. She sat in the town's little depot with her carpetbag, 23 years old and out of places to be passed along to, too old now to be anyone's ward and too poor to be anyone's tenant, and she felt the road opening up under her again the way it always had, endless and homeless. And something in her that had held on a long time came very close to letting go. It was an old freighter in the depot who told her about the way station, not meaning anything by it, just talking to fill the wait. There was an old stage station out on the abandoned overland cutoff, he said, the Lone Tree Station, 30 miles into the empty panhandle, where the emigrant road and the stage line had run before the railroad killed them both. Nobody'd used it in 30 years. County couldn't give it away. $1 would buy it if a body was fool enough, and what would a body do with a caved-in station in the middle of nowhere? He laughed. But Temperance did not laugh. She had $1. And more than that, more than the freighter could have known. She heard, in the words way station, something that reached all the way down to the wagon-born child she had been. A way station was a place built for exactly what she had been her whole life. People with no home, passing through, needing shelter for a night on a hard road. She had slept in 100 places that were not hers. She had never once owned the roof. And here was a roof, a whole building made for travelers, that she could own outright for the last coin in her pocket. She caught a ride with the Wolfer's wagon most of the way and walked the last miles across a plain gone gold and rust with autumn, the wind pouring over it in long waves through the grass, not another human thing in sight from horizon to horizon. She understood the loneliness of it, and it did not frighten her, because she had been lonely in crowds her whole life, and this at least was an honest loneliness, clean and enormous. And at the end of the old road, beside the single gnarled cottonwood that gave the place its name, stood the Lone Tree Way Station, a long, low building of sod and timber and native stone, its roof half fallen, its walls slumping back toward the earth, and rising from its center the one thing that still stood proud and whole, a great double chimney of fired brick and stone, cracked but unbowed, that had once warmed a room full of strangers on both its faces. Temperance stood in the dead road and looked at it, and where the freighter had seen a ruin, she saw a hearth, a great double hearth, built to warm travelers, waiting 30 years for someone to light it again. That first night she made her bed on the swept-clean earth of the long common room, in the lee of the great cold chimney, wrapped in her shawl with the wind working at the fallen roof above her, and she did a thing she had not done since she was a small child in the wagon. She talked to the building. Softly, half ashamed, she told it that she had come to stay, that she knew it was broken, and she knew how to mend broken things, having been one her whole life. That she was not passing through, the way everyone had always passed her through, but that she meant to light its fire and keep it, and that if it would only hold together through the winter, she would make it warm and tight and kind, the way her mother had taught her, the way it had clearly once been. She felt foolish saying it to the dark and the wind, but she also felt for the first time in 23 years the strange, settling peace of speaking to something that was hers, not borrowed, not endured, not one bad season from the road, but hers, deed and dollar and fallen roof, and all. She slept better on that cold earth floor than she had ever slept in 11 other people's warm beds, and she woke before dawn and lay watching the gray light find the great chimney. And she did not get up until she had decided, fully and for the first time, that she would not be moved from this place by anything short of death. The county's affairs were handled in the nearest live town, at a stage and freight office run by a weathered practical man named Josiah Sample, who plainly thought the young woman had lost her senses. The Lone Tree Station, he told her, was the deadest property in the county. The overland traffic had ended when the Union Pacific went through in '69. The station had been abandoned for 30 years. The emigrant road it stood on had gone back to buffalo grass. There was nothing out there, Sample said, but a fallen roof and 30 miles of nothing in every direction, and $1 would make it hers, but it would also, likely, make her a widow of the prairie before spring, alone out there with the blizzards and the wolves, and not a soul within a day's ride. Temperance laid her silver dollar on his desk, the last of everything, and signed her name in a careful hand, and Josiah Sample sighed and gave her the paper and a long look, and told her that if she had any sense she'd be back on the next freight, and that he'd hold no grudge if she was. She was not back on the next freight. By the time she reached Lone Tree again with what few supplies her last dollar's credit could stretch to, she had already begun, in her mind, to make it a home, because that was the one thing her hands knew how to do. There was no town out there to laugh at her, no neighbors to bet against her. That was the loneliness and also the mercy of the place. There was only, some days later, a single visitor, an old Sioux man named Standing Elk, who had run a small band's horses in that country for longer than the station had stood empty, and who rode down to look, with grave curiosity, at the woman rebuilding the dead white man's station by the Lone Tree. He did not warn her off. He watched her chink a wall for a while in silence, and then he told her, in careful English, that his people remembered this place, that in the emigrant years it had been a kind one, that the man who kept it had traded fair and turned no one away, and that the tree it stood beneath was old and had watched a great deal. Then he rode off, but he came back, in the weeks after, more than once, and left things without a word, a haunch of antelope, a bundle of dried herbs against the winter cough, and Temperance understood that in this emptiest of places she had somehow been quietly adopted, and it undid her a little, because no one had looked after her since her mother died. It was a strange friendship, made almost entirely of small acts and few words, and it became the first real belonging Temperance had ever known. Standing Elk did not treat her as a ward to be tolerated or a use to be gotten. The way every household of her childhood had, he treated her as a person doing an honorable and difficult thing in a hard country, which was to make a dead place live again. And he respected that the way he respected weather and horses and the old tree itself. Some afternoons he would sit on his heels in the sun and watch her work and tell her things, how the winters came in off the north, which grass held the snow and which let it blow clear, where the antelope wintered, how the emigrants in the old years had feared this dry stretch and blessed the station that broke it. She listened the way she had once listened, as a child, to her mother teaching her to keep a home, as if the words were a kind of dowry, a wealth being handed to her that no one could ever take back. She was learning the country, and a person who is learning a country, she discovered, is a person who is beginning, at last, to be from somewhere. She poured herself into the station the way a starving person eats. Everything her mother had taught her, everything she had learned in 100 houses that were never hers, she brought to bear on this one that finally was. She cleared the fallen roof and laid new sod over new timber. The old way, the way that would hold against a panhandle winter. She chinked the slumping walls with mud and grass until they stood square and tight again. She swept 30 years of dust and swallow nests from the long common room where emigrants had once slept shoulder to shoulder. And she saved the great double chimney for the heart of the work, because a home is only a home when the fire is lit. And she meant to light this one on both its faces and warm a building that had been cold for 30 years. But the chimney needed mending first. Cracked mortar, a slumped course of brick at the base of the northern face, and it was in the mending of it, on her knees at the foot of the great hearth, that she found the thing 30 years had hidden. She knew it the way her mother had taught her to know a wall that lied, by a wrongness in the work itself. She was raking out the old crumbling mortar at the base of the northern chimney face, meaning to repoint it, when her tool struck a section where the brick was not laid like the rest. The whole chimney had been built by a mason's hand, courses even and true. But low on the northern face, behind the firebox, one panel of brick was cruder, laid by someone in a hurry, someone who was not a mason. The joints thick and uneven, the bricks a slightly different make, as if this one small section had been torn out and re-bricked by unpracticed hands. A homemaker knows every honest inch of a hearth. This section was not honest. And Temperance, kneeling in the cold ash of a fire 30 years dead, understood that someone had bricked something into the base of this chimney, and had done it fast, and had meant it never to be found. It took her most of a day to work the crude bricks loose, and her hands were raw by the end of it, and when the last one came free and she reached into the cold cavity behind, her fingers closed on wood. She drew it out into the light of the fallen-in doorway, a small chest, a traveling chest of the kind emigrants carried, iron-cornered, its leather straps rotted but its oak sound, and strapped to its lid with a length of the same rotted leather, a packet of oilcloth, and inside the oilcloth a folded letter, the paper soft and brown as an old leaf, the ink faded but the hand clear, a woman's hand, careful and a little unsteady, as if written in cold or in grief. She did not open it at once. She sat back on her heels at the foot of the great hearth with the little chest in her lap, and simply held it, the way she had learned to hold anything precious that came into her homeless hands, carefully, provisionally, ready to have it taken away. Because everything always had been. The chest was somebody's. That was her first clear thought. This was not treasure the way the freighter would have meant it. This was the packed and cornered and lovingly strapped chest of a person, hidden in the warm heart of a house, and a woman who had slept in 11 houses that belonged to other people knew in her bones that she was holding something that had mattered terribly to someone. The wind moved through the broken roof. The cold ash of a 30-year dead fire was gray around her knees. And Temperance Aldous, who had found in one afternoon more than she had ever owned, felt not the joy of a lucky find, but a kind of solemn dread. The sense of having knocked on a door she had not known was a door, behind which someone was waiting to speak. Temperance sat down in the ashes at the foot of the great hearth and unfolded it, and the prairie wind moved through the broken roof above her, and she read. To whoever finds this, and lights this fire again, it began. If you have opened this wall, then you are mending this hearth, and if you are mending this hearth, then you mean to make this place a home. And that is the only hope I have left to hold to, that some day a kind hand would want to warm this station again, and would find what I could not carry and could not bear to leave behind. Her name had been Serena Fairfax, and she and her husband Amos had kept the Lone Tree Way Station in the last years of the Emigrant Road, from 1859 to 1863, had run it as a stop where the westering wagons could rest, and buy a hot meal, and sleep under a roof for a night before the hard, dry stretch ahead. They had built the double chimney themselves, she wrote, so that 2 rooms could be warm at once and no traveler need sleep called. They had meant to keep it for their lives. And then, in the terrible spring of 1863, the diphtheria had come west with the wagons, as it did in those years, and it had swept through the station in a single dreadful fortnight, and it had taken from Serena Fairfax, one after another, in the space of 2 weeks, her husband Amos and all 3 of her children. Temperance read that paragraph and had to stop, and press the back of her raw hand to her mouth, and look up at the broken roof and the cold, indifferent sky, because she knew something about being left alone in the world. But she did not know anything like this. I buried them under the lone tree. The letter went on, all 4, with my own hands, for there was no one else, the road being late in the season, and no wagons near. And I found that I could not stay, and I could not go. I could not keep the station where I had been so happy and was now so alone. Every warm room was a grave. But I could not bear to strip it and sell it and let strangers make it only a business, when it had been our whole life and held our whole love. So I have done the only thing my breaking heart could think to do. I have taken everything we saved in 9 hard years of honest keeping, every coin, and it is more than you would think. For we lived simple, and the emigrant trade was good. And I have taken the few small precious things of my children's, and my wedding silver, and I have sealed them into the heart of the hearth we built together, into the warm center of this house, where they will be safe and close, and out of the reach of anyone who would only spend them. And I am going back east, to my sister, to try to live. I do not expect to return. I am too tired and too sad to return. And then the part that Temperance would carry the rest of her life, I do not leave this for a treasure hunter, and I pray no such hand ever finds it. I leave it for the one who comes to make this a home again, for someone must, some day. A hearth wants a family the way a body wants breath. Whoever you are, if you are reading this, then you are that person, and I want you to have it, all of it, freely, and with my whole heart, on one condition only, which is not truly a condition, but a gift I am giving you along with the rest. Light the fire. Keep this station kind as we kept it. Turn no cold traveler away. And if you can, tend the 4 graves under the tree, and know that the family who lived here loved this place, and loved the strangers who passed through it, and would be glad past telling to know that a home lives here again. That is all. The fire is yours now. Keep it lit. Serena Fairfax, this heartbroken May 1863. Temperance Aldous, who had been born homeless and orphaned young and passed hand to hand her whole life, and had come within an inch of letting go in a depot 2 months before, sat in the ashes of a stranger's hearth, holding the last letter of a woman who had lost everything, and had reached across 30 years to give a home to whoever came next. She opened the chest. Inside, wrapped in the soft cloth of a mother's careful packing, was Serena Fairfax's whole life, coin, in leather sacks gone stiff with age, gold and silver both. 9 years of honest keeping, more than Temperance had earned in the whole of her working life, enough, she would understand slowly, to never be put on the road again. And beside the coin, wrapped separately and more carefully still, the small things, a christening gown, a child's carved wooden horse, a girl's hair ribbon, a set of wedding silver with 2 entwined initials, the precious weightless relics of a family that had been happy in this house before the world took them. Temperance held the little carved horse in her raw palm for a long time, and she did not feel that she had found a treasure. She felt that she had been handed a family's love to keep, and asked, in return, only to do the one thing in all the world she had always known how to do and never been allowed to make a home, and keep it kind. She told Standing Elk, because he was the only soul she had, and because his people remembered this place. She read him the letter, haltingly, and the old man listened with his eyes closed, and when she came to the part about the 4 graves under the tree he nodded slowly, and told her that his people had known, that they had seen the lone white woman digging in the spring of the sickness year, and had left her alone in her grief, and had watched her go east and never return, and had wondered all these years what became of the kind station and the sad woman who kept it. He took Temperance out to the tree, and there, where the grass grew a little different, he showed her the 4 graves that 30 years had nearly erased, and Temperance knelt in the buffalo grass and wept for a family she had never met, and then she did what the letter asked. She did all of it. She did not go to the county, or the stage agent, or anyone who would have made the coin into a thing to be reported and taxed and talked about, because Serena Fairfax had not left it to be spent that way, and Temperance would not spend it that way. She used it as it had been meant, to make Lone Tree a home again, and to keep it kind. She finished the station properly, a sound roof, tight walls, glass in the windows, and both faces of the great double chimney lit at last, warming the long common room the way they had warmed it for the emigrants 30 years before. She tended the 4 graves under the cottonwood, cleared them and marked them with a single stone she had a mason cut and haul out from town, 1 stone for the whole family. That read, the Fairfax family, they kept this place kind. And then she did the thing that turned a homeless woman's windfall into something Serena Fairfax would have wept to see. She kept a way station, for the road was not quite as dead as the stage agent believed. It carried no stages anymore, no emigrant trains, but it carried the scattered life of an empty country, cowboys moving herds across the panhandle, freighters on the long hauls, homestead families going to and from the far railheads, a circuit preacher, a horse trader, the occasional lost and desperate traveler caught by weather 30 miles from anywhere. And now, at Lone Tree, where for 30 years there had been only a ruin, there was a warm room and a hot meal and a roof for the night, kept by a woman who turned no cold traveler away. Because she knew, better than anyone alive she knew, exactly what it was to arrive somewhere with nowhere to sleep. Word of it spread across the empty country the way word does. There was a station at Lone Tree again. The Aldous woman would take you in. She charged what a traveler could pay and nothing from a traveler who had nothing, and she kept the fire lit on both faces of the great chimney all winter long, and in the worst of the blizzards, more than once. That lit window 30 miles from anywhere was the thing that stood between some frozen wanderer and death on the prairie. She came to think of the fire as a promise she was keeping for two women at once, for Serena Fairfax, who had asked her to keep it lit, and for the homeless girl she had been herself, who had stood outside so many lit windows in the cold, understanding that the warmth was real but was not for her. Now the window was hers, and the warmth was hers, and she gave it away to every cold traveler who came, because she had finally learned the thing her whole hungry childhood had hidden from her, that a home is not a thing you keep by holding it close, but a thing you keep by opening the door. Josiah Sample, the stage agent who had told her she'd be a widow of the prairie by spring, heard the stories over the years with growing astonishment, and came out at last himself, an old man by then, caught by early snow on a journey he'd had no business making, and was taken in and warmed and fed at the station he'd sold for $1, by the woman he'd been sure would freeze. He sat by the great double hearth with a bowl of her stew and looked at the warm, tight home she'd made of the ruin, and had the grace to say he had never in his life been so glad to be so wrong. She never married, and never seemed to mind it. Though the country would have had her, she used to say she had all the family she needed, and mean the travelers who came and went, and the 4 under the tree she tended like her own. But she did, in a way, get children after all. Over the years, the homeless ones found their way to Lone Tree the way water finds the low place. An orphaned boy off a broken wagon, a runaway girl, a widow with nowhere, a hand too old to work the herds anymore, and Temperance Aldous, who had been passed hand to hand her whole young life and never wanted, took them in, and gave them a warm room and honest work and a place at her table, and let them stay as long as they needed, which for some of them turned out to be the rest of their lives. She made, out of a dead way station and a heartbroken stranger's buried love, the one thing she had never had and had always known how to build. A home that turned no one away. If you cross the Nebraska panhandle today, out along the ghost of the old overland cutoff, and few do, it is grass and wind and the occasional fence now, the Lone Tree station still stands beneath its cottonwood, which is older still, and somehow living yet. It is kept as it was, by the descendants and inheritors of the strangers Temperance took in, and the great double chimney still stands at its heart, and on certain nights they still light it on both faces, the way she asked them to, the way Serena Fairfax asked her to. The little chest is there, under glass, with the christening gown and the carved wooden horse and the wedding silver, and the soft brown letter in a woman's grieving hand, and beside it a second letter, in Temperance Aldous's own careful writing, that she left for whoever would come after her, and it says only, at the end, light the fire. Keep this station kind. Turn no cold traveler away. I kept the fire for 30 years. Now it is yours. And out under the Lone Tree there are 5 graves now, not 4, for Temperance Aldous asked to be buried with the family whose home she kept, and the stone over her says, by her own request, she kept the fire lit. There is a kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with keeping. It waits in the warm heart of a hearth, bricked into the center of a house, not for the one who will spend it, but for the one who will light the fire. And a broken heart, 30 years dead, always seems to know that person is coming. The world had told Temperance Aldous she was worthless the same way it had told that station it was dead, with a shrug and $1 and a fallen roof. It only ever takes one person who knows how to keep a home to prove the world's cold arithmetic wrong. Temperance Aldis was 23 years old and homeless. She had $1 silver to her name, and she spent it on a caved-in Prairie way station on a dead emigrant road in the Nebraska panhandle. It was the best dollar she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what does home mean to you, and who taught you how to make one? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.